Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Gotta love that. Gotta love it. Okay, here we go.
Okay. All right.
Welcome back. Silver and Black today, an Odyssey original podcast, the live post-game version here of the show. Scott Gulbransen, your host, joined by my good friend and our post-game co-host, and that, of course, is Murf from Raiders Fan Radio, who will give us the voice of the fan, which might include some raised voices. We'll see in just a minute. But do us a favor, if you don't already subscribe to the podcast, do so wherever you get your audio. Also, if you're watching us on YouTube, we will be in the chat if I can keep up with it. I know it's going to be fast and furious in there tonight, but we'd appreciate a subscription there as well. Also, subscribe to Raiders Fan Radio. All the same places. Get your audio on YouTube as well. Don't miss their show on Wednesdays, and we'll talk about that later in the show, as we always do. The Raiders lose to the Lions on Monday Night Football, 26-14. If you told me the score, I actually predicted 28-13, so I was not far off. But the way in which the Raiders lost and some of the elements of this loss, we're going to get into, because I think it deserves some scrutiny, because, boy, they had a team meeting this week and things did not get better on offense. The defense came out. We're going to talk about that as well. Max Crosby, I will call this the Max Crosby game, and that's almost a disservice because of the way the Raiders played on the offensive side of the ball. But Max Crosby continues to show why, if he was on a team that had any clue, he would for sure be a Defensive Player of the Year candidate. He is a candidate, but we all know that they end up giving those awards to teams that are winning as well. So unfortunately for Max, but just amazing. And I want to talk about Max too in the next segment as we get into it, because he did something amazing while he was home at Michigan, in Michigan this week, and it deserves some call out for attention. All right, so let's jump into this. And again, if you're on the YouTube channel, we will be in there. If I can get in there, I'm trying to get in there on the computer. Of course, we're live, so it's all happening at the same time here. Let me see if I can get in there and go. But anyway, okay, so let's talk about this because I'll tell you what, Murph, it really was just another situation where the Raiders can't get out of their own way. The Raiders come out and have a spirited defensive effort, and the offense, again, just can't do anything. So, as always, we start the show off, and I turn it over to Murph here for our Voice of the Fan. Murph, talk about this game. Talk about what you thought about watching it from the very beginning, especially with this ineptitude that we're seeing on offense.
Yeah. So first off, thank you for everybody joining us tonight. We appreciate you so very, very much. And, Scott, I've gotten a lot of messages tonight from folks on the X and otherwise that have said, like, I can't wait to hear your rant tonight, Murph. I can't wait to hear you, go off on this team. And Scott, I feel like at this point, like I'm kind of tired of that. Like I'm getting to the numb point of the season where it's like, the ineptitude could not, and I'm sure at some point, and I usually talk myself up into a froth anyways, but like the ineptitude could not be on greater display. And it's an absolute and abject failure what this coaching staff and what this front office has done with this football team, to the point to which Troy Aikman is even calling out Rich Bisaccia on the air and saying, this was a 10-win football team that went to the playoffs, and now look at, here's where we're at. The failures are so numerous that I don't even know where to begin. I'm a positive guy, and so I want to lean into being positive about things. So shout out the under at 43.5. Thanks, MGM Sportsbook. So, like, that's something to be positive about. And then you mentioned Max Crosby has a great game. The linebacking core was having a great game until Luke Masterson got dinged up there. And if it weren't for his betting show, I'm sure we'd see Will Compton coming into the building soon. But, like, so you saw some spirited play. We saw spirited play at Adam Butler. I thought had a great game. Some great pressure up the middle. The pick six that Goff throws to Marcus Peters is absolutely created by the pressure of that interior, forcing him out and into a bad throw. So there are a handful of things to be positive about on defense, but offensively, like, we are so ass. It's like, it's so bad. Like, I mean, other than Josh Jacobs finally getting going a little bit. When you look at the stats, and I'm sure, Scott, you always do such a great job of like running down the statistics of things and what those numbers actually break down into. But just without even having those at hand to reference, it's absolute some of the worst ever. And shout out the chat room. And I really try to keep up with it best I can. I can't even see the chat, but I got on my phone here so I can keep up with it. And one of the questions in there was, is this the worst offense we've seen like ever? Like, have you ever seen? Or in terms of offensive, output and coaching and whatnot. I mean, Mike White, anyone? Like that whole bed and breakfast offense, like it's up there. We're talking about the worst of the worst in terms of offensive output. And I joked about betting the under on this game, but when the Raiders can only put up 7 points offensively, well, of course. And I'm going to keep betting the unders on every goddamn Raider game until they finally freaking have a breakout, because this team cannot put points on the board. It's such an embarrassment. $104 million spent on offense. The supposed offensive guru. We shouted the praises of Carmen Brasillo last year and his ability to coach up the offensive line. Everything has gotten worse and worse and worse. And then if you start comparing, look at what the Lions have done from a head coaching perspective and the trajectory that they are on now. They started off 3-13 in Dan Campbell's first year, then worked themselves into 9-8 after going 1-6 in the first 7 games. But the players were still bought in. They praised Dan Campbell. They praised the direction of the team. That's a different kind of losing than what the Raiders are doing now. You look at what the Raiders are doing in terms of targeting their tight end, Michael Mayer versus Sam Laporta. Like what? It's so confusing, Scott. And tonight I thought was the ultimate contrast of the direction this team is going. And I'm going to shut up because I'll start rambling and get all frothy again like I knew it was going to happen. Mark Davis, like for real, Mark, we're going to see you next week. We're going to see you this week. We're going to see you on Friday night. I love Mark Davis. He's the most passionate Raider fan that's ever existed. He's going to carry his father's legacy to the end of the day. What more do you need to see to finally make a decision to move on from McClown Daniels, man? Let's freaking pull the plug on this thing. Let's move on to something else. I don't care if it's a full court press for Jim Harbaugh or my vote is for Jeff Ulbrich, the defensive coordinator from the Jets. That's the guy. But let's freaking move on. It's time to freaking go. This Josh McDaniels thing, done and over.
There you go. Murph with the voice of the fan. And listen, I can't disagree with you trying to look at it from an objective standpoint. And I'm working on a piece for Sportsnaut tomorrow where I just call it what it is. And that is this front office too. By the way, there's lots of, I want to shout out to hashtag HYB, a $20 super chat, which of course, all the super chats here on Silver and Black today go to Murph and the One Nation Foundation, which we always talk about before we end the show. So you know what that is. But he says, how come no one ever calls out Mark Davis? It's Del Rio's fault, Dennis Allen's, McDaniel's fault, etc. for 20 years plus inept football. Yet Mark Davis gets a free pass. Emperor wearing new clothes, anyone. So HYB, thank you again for your donation to the One Nation Foundation. But he's right. And in my piece that's going to run late tonight or tomorrow, I call that out because, listen, not only is McDaniels failed, McDaniels wanted his quarterback. Now, there's been reports, well, they wanted Brady and he wasn't really. No, they went with Jimmy Garoppolo, okay? Yep. And Dave Ziegler and Josh McDaniels. Now Dave Ziegler has entered the room. Dave Ziegler has to be called out because I'm watching the Lions and I'm watching as they pop up their 4 draft picks from this year who are all having a good game, okay? 4 draft picks contributing heavily to a Lions team that will make the playoffs, I believe, barring some major injuries on that squad. I'm not saying they're going to win a Super Bowl, folks. I'm saying, though, that they went out, they have built that team well. And to your point about the coach, they got the right guy in there, had a little bit of a rough time, but he got them to believe. Now, players can come out and say, well, no, it's not that we don't believe, and no, he hasn't lost the locker room. And I can't say that he has because I'm not in there. But I will tell you that it's all empty. They had a team meeting this week. Nothing happened on offense. Now, if I'm Max Crosby, I get back in that locker room tonight and I'm having my own team meeting and I'm calling out the offense. I'm calling out Jimmy Garoppolo, even at the end of the game, had a wide open touchdown to Devontae Adams, missed him. I mean, the ineptitude at quarterback, you cannot overcome. I had Brian Baldinger on my show last week. And he talked about it. Look, you got to go get a quarterback. You cannot overcome bad quarterback play in the NFL. And you saw that tonight. Greg Bayman, shout out $5 too, by the way, with a just smarten up comment, which is funny if it wasn't so sad. But nonetheless, so thank you for your donation. But if you look at this, it's a complete organizational failure. There's no other way to put it. You move on from Derek Carr. I saw some of those people pop into the conversation tonight. Well, if we had Derek Carr, we're not going back to that. It's not that you got rid of Derek Carr. It's that you did not replace him with someone who can play. Amen. So you look at this situation and you say to yourself, if I'm a Raider fan, even I got a lot of hell yesterday because I said, hey, on X.com, I posted, listen, you never know. It's the NFL. On any given Sunday, I know it's a Monday night, anything can happen. I was saying that. You even had your positive message out before the game, Murph. And it's true, right? It's like you just never know what's going to happen. And you know what? The Lions didn't play that well. They did not play as well as they could, partly because the Raiders' defense in the first half was incredibly dominant. And Max Crosby, Troy Aikman called it out and said, I've never seen a player who can completely take over a game like Max Crosby has. And he did. But we all knew, and they said it in the first half, this defense is going to get tired unless this offense can put something together. And they could not put anything together. And I'm not a huge stats guy, but I was sending out a lot of stats tonight because Garoppolo, 10 of 21, 126 yards, 1 interception, a passer rating of 46.9. The first half, he had a passer rating, Murph, of 3.3. I don't remember, and look, I watch every game every week now since I cover the whole league too, but I'm watching that, I'm like, I don't think I've ever seen somebody with under 10 or 12 or 20, some really bad games. Jimmy Garoppolo is hot garbage. There is no other way around it. And Josh McDaniels went into this week, Murph, and said he gives us the best chance to win. So I ask you, is he completely blind to what's happening? Or is he just that much of a bad coach? Because he did nothing to help this team win. In fact, he hurt the team more than he helped. And at halftime, look, I know, start 8-0, Collins. But you know what? Why not? Why can't you bench your quarterback? Kyle Shanahan did it to Garoppolo many times in San Francisco. That's why he eventually moved on from him. He's like, screw this, I'm moving on. Mm-hmm. But it's, again, I go back to the statement I've been making for 2 years. Coaching malpractice at its highest level, and I don't know how Mark Davis can watch that game and think in any way that it could get better.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. So, Josh McDaniels now, I just saw it flash up on the screen as he's doing his presser. He now has a 3-11 road record as the Raiders head coach. As you mentioned, 3.3 was Jimmy Garoppolo's rating in the first half. The only threes we want to see out of the Raiders is freaking Darryl LaMonica. Shout out your Notre Dame cap there right? Go. Like that's the only three we want to see. Like that, it's absolutely, again, it's back to the whole story that it's an abject failure in terms of personnel decisions. I thought at first when it was floated out by a lot of fans that, this staff and this front office was banking on the idea that Tom Brady was going to come in and play quarterback. The longer this thing goes on, the more that I'm thinking that that's absolutely the case. Again, it's just Murph theory here, and I don't know anything other than just what the tea leaves are kind of spreading out here. But I think that they moved on from Derek thinking that TB12 was in the wings and going to come in. And then when Tom retired, it forced them to do something that they didn't necessarily want to, nor were prepared to do. And that is Jimmy Garoppolo. And listen, and I'm with you, Scott, like there could not be a bigger failure in terms of personnel decision than what the Raiders have done at quarterback. And I feel like a lot of times our conversations focus around quarterback. Like there's so many, listen, there's 22 positions on the field, but we always come back to the quarterback because it's so critical. It's the most important position in all of team sports. And so you got to have a freaking quarterback. And I'm of the opinion that you swing on a franchise quarterback until you freaking hit one. That's Absolutely. the way that the league is going. When you look around and you look at the teams in the NFL that are finding success, they're doing it with young, productive quarterbacks. That's whatever, veteran guys or whatever that have already been proven and whatnot. But the point being though, so I'm with you. Like this felt like such a half step. And I feel like that's one of the reasons that maybe he's got some grace with Mark Davis. Maybe Mark is hip to the idea that like, okay, this was our plan. It was going to be Tom, it was going to be whatever. And now it wasn't. So they're doing the best that they can. But is this really the best we can do? And I don't understand that if you have a young man in the building that you've invested a draft pick in, why not play him? Why not play Aiden O'Connell? I'm with you. Why not bench Jimmy G? I mean, if your goalie gets 5 goals scored on him in the first 2 periods, you put in someone else. Just at a minimum, give him a break and hopefully retain some confidence for the guy going into the next game. So why wouldn't he pull Jimmy G and see what Aiden had? It's not like we were in contention to win the game late. It's not like there was a game on the line there. By the time you go down 2 scores, like move on from it and see what else you got. Because that's what your future is. And that's what's so confusing to all of us as Raider fans. And you asked the question, is he just blind to it? Scott, I don't know what else to say. Like,
yeah, it's hard.
I like to think that Josh McDaniels knows more about football or forgotten even more about football than I'll ever know as a fan sitting here in my damn bonus room. But like, really, what do the optics tell us? At some point, it comes down to the most basics of things. And what is there that what is it that he's hanging his hand on other than, and here's where I'll close up my comments with this. This isn't pride is what's going to get you. Pride is what gets you in the end. It doesn't matter who you are. When you buy into yourself and you've bought into your own self-hype and you buy into your however many rings you've got with the Patriots and all that, when you buy into that shit, when you buy into that stuff, that's what gets you in the end. Because of your inability to be flexible, because that's what this thing is all about. Being flexible. We heard so many times through all these young players that are in the NFL nowadays, they are put all the way down to Tyson Bagent last week with the Bears. They are put in positions and take advantage of the talent in which they have in place and put their players in positions to take advantage of the things that they can do well. I don't see that other Raiders. It's like Josh is so married to this damn system. Well, your system sucks, bruh. Like, it's over.
And that's the point. That's the point. You bring it up, and it's a key one here. As I see the chat going crazy, is the fact that listen, I know fans are fans, and they're going to think that their team's going to do most of the time going to do better than they will. I picked them to win 7 games. I thought it would be a struggle this year with the switchover, but I thought you would see progress, and that's what I'm seeing. I mean, I'm seeing some progress on defense. So as many people that were coming onto this show and saying, fire Patrick Graham, listen, that defense with the players that he has gotten better. When you wear on in a game like tonight, that defense is going to give out. Listen, no human being, no matter how they're conditioning. I mean, Max Crosby is a freak of nature, so good for him. But overall, you're not going to be able to keep up. And that's what happened. They also had guys go out with injury. Divine Diablo was not there tonight. And despite that, they played well. But with McDaniels, the problem, to your point about pride and hubris here, is the fact that they do not change a thing, even when the results continue. It's like, well, if we just keep, it's like, hey, I'm climbing up this hill and it's muddy and I keep slipping and I'm not moving an inch. I just got to keep going. I just got to keep going. Now, one of my favorite quotes, of course, is from Churchill, which is when you're going through hell, just keep going. The problem is you keep going because you keep walking and you keep making progress. The issue with the Raiders on offense is there's no progress. There is absolutely no progress. You can say, well, Josh Jacobs, yeah, he did better tonight. No question about it. He looked himself for a little bit there, and it was amazing. By the way, Joel Denning, $20. Thank you. And I'm going to read his question here in a second, so don't go anywhere, Joel. But the question I have is, why do you think it's going to work? What evidence do you have to show? And you talked about, we're not football coaches. I coached 2 years. I coached my son in Pee Wee football. Okay, that's the extent of my football coach. And most of the time, I just kept the kids in order with the real guys who knew how to coach were coaching. But it doesn't take an expert or an NFL personnel executive to see that your quarterback is brutal. He's terrible. He is not doing anything to help your team when he's in there. He leads the league in interceptions, and he's missed 2.5 games. The Raiders have scored 2 touchdowns in 2 games. 2 touchdowns in 2 games. They had one tonight from the defense, 2 forced fumbles from the defense, okay? So the defense put them in position to be able to get the ball back on turnovers and score points. They didn't do that, okay? So you look at that and you say to yourself, wait a minute, what is not right here? And what we're seeing is, well, Jimmy's our best chance. I don't think he is. I'm not saying Aiden O'Connell is going to go out and win 7 games. I'm not saying that. Aiden O'Connell may lose the rest of the games of the year if he started at quarterback. I don't know. But what do you have to lose at this point? You have a guy, you're paying all that money. That's the only reason he's still starting, is because they put all of their bets on Jimmy Garoppolo. And guess what? It's all come up snake eyes. It's come up trash, as my good friend Kelly Kreiner says. So I'm not going to sit here and listen to anybody. And I haven't seen the press conference yet. I'll watch it later from my story I got to write. But if I hear that, oh, well, we did well kicking again, or if I hear that, well, we did this, is there going to be any admission from the coach that, yeah, we got to go back to the drawing board? The drawing board, not we got to make adjustments and we just got to play better. No. You have to change your approach. The approach does not work.
Absolutely. And I love that you brought up the we, because it's unfortunate that when Josh McDaniels is in a press conference, he never says I. And I understand the concept of it's all about a team, right? And it's when you talk in terms of the team, but that's in terms of success. In terms of failure, it should be I. Here's what I need to do better. And I've called out beat writers before, and none in particular, but I would just say this: ask him what he can do better. In particular, in specificity, what can you do better, Josh McDaniels? Not what can the team in general topics and terms. Listen, you want to talk like you're Bill Belichick? You can't do that because you don't have 9 goddamn rings. So you got to talk in specifics until you earn the bona fides in order to not to. And so until then, tell us specifically what you can do to get better. And I feel like if we would press him a little bit, we might get a little bit of behind the scenes, because as of right now, it's ambiguous. We don't know. So as long as we're collectively we and none of it is you, then we don't know what's going on in your brain, because I'm with you, Scott. What evidence is there that has been provided that we are heading in a positive direction, and especially at the quarterback? I mentioned earlier about how when we looked around the league and we looked at young players and being put in positions to be successful, none was more obvious this whole week than Will Levis. Will Levis balled out. And of course, in Raider Nation on the X there, we're all going, well, it's a good thing we moved up to get Michael Mayer and not throw to him. In the meantime, Will Levis is freaking throwing 4 touchdown passes for however many ungodly amount of yards.
Will Levis, yeah.
To throwing bombs to D-Hop. I think D-Hop had 3 touchdowns in that game. So Will Levis is like, he's done amazing, and that's a player that the Raiders passed up on. So anyways, point being, though, was that he was put in a position to be successful. This was a football team that was on its heels. They just traded Kevin Byard, arguably, besides Jeff Simmons, their best defensive player. This was a team that was in sell mode, and then here they have this guy come out and ball out. And why? Because Vrabel and the offensive staff put him in position to do so. So my question is this, and when we take that scenario and then apply it to the Raiders, why in the hell can't Josh McDaniels follow suit? Why not put your young man, Aiden O'Connell, in a position to be successful? And if he's not successful, that's okay. We'll find out and we'll at least know the answer, but it will at least put our team in a position to be competitive and grow. Because right now we're in a period of regression, and regression is the ultimate indictment of bad coaching. So I don't know what else to do there, in terms of interpreting it in that way, Scott. So again, that's where I go to, if you're not willing to then move on from that train of thought, well, then, like you mentioned, the word hubris, that's it. That's it.
Yeah. And Murph, you and I both have had careers in business. So we've both managed people who worked for us. And every time I started a new job, and you brought this up and it just struck a chord with me, because it's exactly what I do. I love to read about leadership, right? So the first thing I do when I meet with a new staff is I say, listen, when things go really, really well, I will be behind you and I will push you out front and say, it was the team. When things go bad, even if it's one of you that screws up really bad, I step forward and I take it. It's me. Hey, Joey didn't do well because I didn't make sure he did well. Okay. So to your point about that's a very, very important point. And we're not seeing that here. And Mark Davis, I know there's a lot of people angry at Mark Davis, and they should be, because at the end of the day, he owns the team. He makes the decisions. Now, that said, he's got some decision making to do now, because this team is not going. They had their team meeting this week. We heard all week about it, and they feel better about going out. And guess what? The result was even worse. It wasn't like status quo. It got worse. So something is not right in there. And your players, they want you to take the blame because they continue to work their tails off and do what they're told to do, and it's not working. Even Josh Jacobs, towards the end of the game, you could see the lack of concentration with the fumble, dropping a pass. That's not because Josh Jacobs is not a good player. I'm not throwing that out there to malign him. I'm throwing it out there because it just shows, it's like, you can see the defeat in the body language, right? Yeah. And so that's it. And Joel Denning, another $20 donation, by the way, so thank you. It says, it all comes down to Davis. He has no heirs, and this team will be sold. If he truly was a fan, he would recognize his own limitations and do it now. He is what his father feared he would be, if not worse. F it, go Raiders. Now, I don't know what his father thought he would be. I know people talk about that. I don't know. Look, who knows? And Mr. Day has been gone for a long time now. But I will tell you that hitting on that is important because this organization is responsible, and Mark Davis owns that organization. All right, let me step aside real quick for a break on YouTube. We'll come right back with you here. It'll just take a couple seconds, and then we'll get into the rest of this discussion. Raiders lose 26-14 on Monday Night Football to the Detroit Lions. You're listening to Silver and Black today, an Odyssey original podcast. All right, we're back on Silver and Black today, the post-game live edition. Here, we are an Odyssey original podcast. Do us a favor, subscribe wherever you get your audio. Even if you just watch us on YouTube, do me the favor and subscribe anyway on the audio. It helps us out significantly. Mo and I would appreciate that very, very much. That's how we get our quote-unquote ratings, so we do that. Also, make sure you go subscribe to the YouTube channel and subscribe to the audio version of Raiders Fan Radio, as well as subscribing and hitting the notification bell up on YouTube for Raiders Fan Radio for Murf, Jeff, and Michelle. We appreciate Uncle Mosh as well, too. All right, so we're back talking about the Raiders. And, you know, I keep going back to the numbers, and it's probably a moot point at this juncture. But I look at it, and I think the Raiders had 12 first downs in the entire game, okay? And you look at Garoppolo's numbers, we talked about that. Time of possession, they had the ball just 20 minutes to the Lions almost 40. So twice as much time. So anybody who looks at this game and says anything about the defense, because the defense faded towards the back end, and that wasn't their fault. It really wasn't. This defense has played better. I'm not saying they're a top 10 defense, folks. Don't get me wrong here, but they played well enough to put the team in position to actually upset the Lions on national TV at home. But as you mentioned, Murph, Josh McDaniels now 3-11 on the road with the Raiders. That tells you they do not do well on the road. They do not prepare well enough to play teams on the road. You go back to, to me, this is the worst offensive game I've seen the Raiders play in the 7 years I've covered them. Now, the doesn't mean they didn't have other bad games, but this is the worst one. Yes, the New Orleans games where they didn't get past the 50-yard line, that was bad. But with a $104 million offense and all the things they got going now, to me, it was much worse. And I just sit there, and again, you go back to coaching. Now, the players play Garoppolo. We talked about it. Put Garoppolo to bed right now because he is hot garbage. But we look at the coaching, the offensive play calling. You didn't put your team in a position well there either. Now, Garoppolo not executing, that limits you to what you can do. Then the Raiders came out and they started just running the ball and having success and got their only touchdown of the game was because they were effectively running the ball. The offensive line was actually blowing Detroit up on the line there for a bit, but that was only a flash in the pan. They could not sustain any offensive momentum whatsoever. That was partly because of the quarterback play, but I just don't understand what the offensive mentality is here. And if you're Mark Davis and you're even Dave Ziegler, if he wants to keep his job, and you see it's not working. It's not working. You've now been through almost exactly half the season, and nothing has gotten better. Murph, I think that, besides getting rid of the coach, if they don't get rid of the coach soon, then something else has to change. If they don't do anything, if we don't hear anything about something changing, then Raider fans have every right to completely turn off, and I know you won't because you bleed silver and black, but I would not blame a fan to say, you know what, I'm not watching another game while this guy coaches unless I hear something's changing.
Yeah, okay, so you talked about the worst maybe that you've ever seen. Shout out the 2006 Raiders that won 2 games, and I was just looking at it here. 3 times we scored 0 points. 6 times we scored less than 10 points. That was a terrible football team. And speaking of also having a good defense, that defense was ranked 8th overall. And when we looked at, a lot of fans will tell you, well, yeah, because the Raiders will get so far behind so early that they didn't have to worry about anything, whatever. There were some ballers on that team. There were some good players on the defensive side of that team. Shout out Nnamdi Asomugha, Stuart Schweiger. Like, there's some good players on that team. But bottom line, though, is that offensively they were put. There was nothing to be said for Aaron Brooks and Andrew Walter, and it was absolutely inept in terms of offense. So it's not the worst. I don't think it's the worst ever. But the idea that we're talking about comparing it to potentially the worst ever, and there are a lot of things that stack up against it, I think that's all you need to know. There's all the evidence that you need to know in terms of the ineptitude. And whether it be that, there's a lot of shots thrown at Josh McDaniels in terms of his play calling. I don't know the X's and O's of the play calling, and I'm not a tape guy or a film guy like you guys are, Ted Wynn, folks like y'all. But I trust your opinions on it. When your opinions come out and you're like, yeah, there's kind of vanilla and very predictable and whatnot, I trust that idea. But then also you look at the execution factor of it, and there's 2 plays tonight that really come to mind. The Raiders have a 4th and 2. Jimmy G rolls out. Josh Jacobs runs to the spot just beyond the line of scrimmage, turns around and puts his hand up. And Jimmy G looks at him, then looks him off, looks downfield, keeps scrambling. Josh Jacobs is still standing there, wide open. And Jimmy G does one of these, like go, 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 and then throws a horrible incompletion downfield. And I'm like, this is now the time that we have chosen to go downfield when it's a 4th and 2, Jimmy. And so is that the quarterback? Is that Josh McDaniels? I don't know, both, but we're talking about total ineptitude. And then the last one I'll tell you is that the one that was the most glaring tonight, and it started off the game, we get this incredible defensive play by Luke Masterson, stripping out the ball. Bob Spillane falls on it. We get all this momentum, all this fire on defense. And what do we do on the next play? Jimmy G freaking floats one into the front part of the end zone. Instead of putting it to the back of the end zone where only Devontae Adams can get to it, instead he throws it up short. The safety cuts up underneath it and picks the ball. And it's like immediately robs the momentum. Anything that we would have a positive going forward immediately gets robbed out of horrible vision, horrible decision-making. And so when we start looking at those things as a collective, I don't know where this team goes from there. I mean, those are hard to move on from. And I think that it's shared responsibility from not only Josh McDaniels, but also Jimmy Garoppolo. And Scott, after that, I'm not sure where we go. And one last thing I'll tell you on this is that you talked about, what Al Davis had to say about Mark. And I think this is the thing that's getting him. Al Davis said he likes people too much. He's too nice. He likes them. He's got a heart for people. He won't move on from. Al Davis would have cut Josh McDaniels loose way long ago, right? Come on, Raider Nation, right? 3 weeks in, Josh would have been gone. This wouldn't have been a done deal. And I'm not even saying that the hyper turnover that we had in coaches is a good thing. And I think towards the latter part of Al's years, there are some things that could have been done different in terms of the way that he was overreactionary because he was chasing, because he was trying to get that last, successful season, that last championship, because he knew that his time with the Raiders and his life was coming towards an end. So I understand what he was doing, but he was chasing a little bit, right? And so he was moving on from guys quick. Bang, 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 going through coaches. That said, though, when even a guy like Tom Flores, a Hall of Fame coach, when it started to drop off, he moved on from him. That's what Al did.
Because he wanted to win.
Because he wanted to dang win. It was more important to put numbers in the left column that wasn't the right column. And that was more important than the relationships that he had. But even still, those guys, from trading away some of the greatest Raiders that ever existed, moving on from some of the greatest coaches, that have been in play for the Raiders, they still respected him in the end. And because they respected the spirit behind it. He wasn't doing these things out of malice. He was doing it out of desire for the Raiders to be the greatest organization in the history of all of sports. That's what it was. And so far, what we've seen out of Mark Davis, he's a little bit slower on the trigger. And again, and I'm not a Mark Davis, big critical guy of Mark. it's his football team. He can do whatever the hell he wants to do with it. I would never tell another man what to do with his money or his business. So he can do whatever he wants to do with it. That said, if I'm in his position, I'd have fired McClown's ass 4 weeks ago at a minimum.
By the way, hashtag HYB, another donation, $10. And he says, it's a known fact. It's a known fact that Derek Carr was scared of pylons, but did he ever have a single digit QB rating? I don't know. Like I said, I'd never seen a single digit. Now, I'm not saying it hasn't happened because there's some bad quarterbacks in the league, and there have been over the years. In one half, I've never seen a 3.3. And you know, the other thing we talked about, again, the Raiders gave up 6 sacks. And again, the offensive line was not upgraded significantly in the offseason. Dave Ziegler, Josh McDaniels said, nope, we're good. We got Greg Van Roten, who plays up and down. He has some moments, and then he has some really bad moments. He had some great moments today. In fact, he sprung Josh Jacobs on a big long run. I say relatively long run because Jacobs had 60 yards again, couldn't break 100 again. But you look at that line, they didn't invest in it. So 6 sacks tonight. But I will tell you, and I'll have to go back and watch the film, and I'll be happy to admit if I'm wrong. I think 3 of them were on Garoppolo. He could not get rid of the ball. He seems completely uncomfortable and scared back there. And that contributes to that problem too. Your offensive line, maybe not as great. Now you go out and hire Jimmy Glass. I know people call him Jimmy Glass. I'm now calling him Jimmy Garbage. But Jimmy Garbage goes out there, and guess what? He's not getting rid of the ball. There's open receivers. The other thing we saw towards the end of the game when Garoppolo missed what would have been for sure a touchdown pass. I mean, Devontae Adams had, 4 or 5 yards ahead of the defender. Easily a touchdown pass, and Garoppolo overthrows it. Then we see Adams on the sideline throw his helmet into the bench in frustration. Totally understand. He's a world-class athlete. He is one of the best in the National Football League. And he has been a good soldier. He's spoken out, but he's done it respectfully. But I will tell you all, Raider Nation, get ready for this week, because this week you're going to see a lot of stories. Now, he's not going to get traded tomorrow. Adam Schefter came on the broadcast and said that the Raiders don't look like they're trading anybody. They're not making any deals. But if I am Devontae Adams, unless I see something change, I'm getting the hell out of Vegas next year. There's no question about it, because how can you go through your career? You're in the peak of your career. And again, they can't get you the ball because they don't have anybody to throw it to you. And so you have these weapons. You talked about Michael Mayer. He had the longest pass of the night for the Raiders tonight was to Mayer for 19 yards. He did drop one that would have been almost equally as long. So you got to point that out. But you have these people. Hunter Renfrow, for all that I've been defending Hunter Renfrow and saying, hey, we haven't used him. Hunter Renfrow had chances tonight and frankly didn't play as well as you want. Now, you could talk about inactivity. He's worried about getting traded. You know, a lot of things go through people's minds. So I'm not making excuses, but I am saying that Hunter Renfrow has his issues too. But nonetheless, Jimmy Garoppolo couldn't distribute the ball. I mean, they didn't have a pass to the wide receivers the entire first half. I mean, you can't win in the NFL today unless you have a competent passing game. And you talked about Will Levis and having a rookie come in. Yes, it's only one game, but in the NFL, you got to keep trying until you get it right. You mentioned it earlier. Go get a quarterback. If that one doesn't work, go get another quarterback. You're about to see Chicago do the same thing with Justin Fields. They're about to give up on him and go get another guy in the draft, whoever that may be. So the whole, and this is the overreaching thing, and I'm rambling a little bit here too, by the way, but I will tell you that this all comes down to player personnel decisions and building a team. And that goes not just to the coach, who has heavy influence in that, of course, but to the front office and Dave Ziegler. As each week goes by, I've been patient in evaluating him because you have some rookies. Tyree Wilson came out, had a nice play to start the game, got hurt, came back. And outside of maybe the film where I can see maybe he did some good things, he didn't factor much in there. So we look at what they've done from a draft pick perspective, and nothing's panned out in 2 years yet either. So that's a concern, because if you're not progressing on the field and you have talent, okay, coaching, absolutely. And we know there's a coaching problem in Las Vegas. But if you don't have the Jimmies and the Joes to get it done on the field either, like you saw with the Lions, then that's not just coaching. If you had a bunch of talent and you aren't getting what you should out of your coach, fine. But looking at this roster too, Murph, you got to question the entire vision and direction of the team. And ultimately, that has to lie with Mark Davis and Mark Davis making decisions. You can hire people you think are the right choice, and in your heart of hearts, you believe it. But how much evidence do you need to know that you made a mistake? And you got to own that mistake.
Wow, there's so much impact there, Scott. So yeah, so let's one of your most recent points was about the lack of depth, right? You got your superstars are drafted in round 1, even round 2, but the depth of your squad obviously is coming in the later rounds. And you talked about how the Lions had highlighted their 4 draft picks. When we look at what the Chiefs did last year, they had all 6 of their draft picks playing the Super Bowl. That's where championships are built. That's where, if you want to keep it in terms of the Raiders, that's where Jack Squirek comes from, right? That's where your Van McElroys come from. Yeah. That's where it's one thing to draft, guys like Howie Long and early in the rounds, but where does the depth come from? That's what's truly important, and that's what builds a championship squad. And that's what the Raiders have failed to do for a very long time. Although we have had some hits in the latter rounds, like Max Crosby and Hunter Renfrow, for the most part, top to bottom. And I think this is where I go with the Raiders a lot of times. We've failed on drafts, regardless of the regime. We've drafted our drafts have been cheeks for years. It's not just been like a recent phenomenon since Ziegler got there. I mean, we're talking about going all the way, other than Reggie McKenzie hitting on Khalil Mack, Derek Carr, and Gabe Jackson in the 2014 draft. Outside of that, you name me a draft, Raider Nation, where we've actually crushed it. There hasn't been any of those, and that's what teams do that are successful year in year out. So that's one part of it, is the depth there. In terms of turning a team around by drafting well, you can see a team flip it quick. We talk about the Lions a lot tonight because that's our most recent opponent. I mentioned they went 3-13, then 9-8, and now here they are, one of the best teams in football, or at least in the NFC at a minimum. You're talking about a 2-year turnaround, because even though they went 9-8 in that second year, they started off 1-6.
Right.
So they had this incredible winning streak towards the back half of the year. So teams turn around the NFL much quicker than they used to. The idea of, and I love my Uncle Mosh, but he was talking about one of our post-game shows about how you got to give it time. You got to give it 3 years or so. And it's, even 3 to 5 years. Those days are over. Those days are over. We're in a different era of the NFL with free agency and whatnot. You can turn a team around quick. Look at the freaking Houston Texans, right? You can flip this thing around relatively fast compared to prior iterations of the NFL. So that's our expectations. Absolutely. As fans. So when we go through a year and a half and things aren't turning around, we're starting to look at our watch and going, okay, well, what else are we waiting for then, right?
Murf, there's not even an inkling of things turning around. Right? There's not. I mean, outside of the way. Yes, outside the defense improving, there's nothing else. And you talk about teams turning it around. Look at Nick Sirianni. Remember, people were making fun of how he did press conferences, and then all of a sudden, they're the second best team right now because the Ravens are playing so well. But you could put them first, second, third, somewhere around there in the NFL, and he turned that thing around quickly. And it started with getting a quarterback, by the way. They got a quarterback, and they built their defense, and they continue to get better. So you're right. This is not 1985. You don't get 3 or 4 years to turn around an NFL team. Other coaches do it more quickly. Yes, there's other examples of owners who are in the same boat of Mark Davis of giving people too much time, but most of those teams do not succeed. They don't end up turning it around, okay? And so you look at that and you say, all right, then what do we do differently? And that's what you have to say is, look, it's a tough business. Any business is tough where you're dealing with people and people who are underperforming, but you have to be a leader. And this is where I'm not going to make fun of his haircut. I'm not going to call him an idiot. But this is where you have to look at ownership and you have to say, look, if you're not able to do it, you got a co-host there, I see.
This is Bomber, named after the legendary Mad Bomber, Daryl LaMonica.
I love it. One of my favorite moments, by the way, in radio was interviewing Daryl on the show in Las Vegas. It was awesome. But you see it. And by the way, happy Halloween to those of you in the Eastern time zone. It was a horror show. It's kind of fitting. So you have to look at the organization and say you have to make decisions. Now, the move to Las Vegas, all this stuff, of course, Raider Nation came with the team to Las Vegas. But in its new home, besides doing well financially, it's not establishing. And remember, no matter how deep and successful the Raiders history is. And Murph, you and I have enough gray hair to know and have lived during that time. A lot of Raider fans listening and watching us don't remember those years because they weren't alive. The Raiders' mystique will always be part of NFL history. But I will tell you, as more time goes on, it's disappearing. And this is why, is because they're not able to do it. I saw it at my alma mater, UNLV. I still love UNLV. We had our little stretch up until the early 90s when we were the talk of college basketball. And since then, we've been irrelevant. The Raiders are the same way. And because there's old heads like us who remember those days, thank goodness it's still alive. But this thing has to turn around, and it has to turn around soon. I know everybody's been saying that for 20 some years, but I'm telling you, they've got to make some good decisions in leadership or it's not going to get any better.
Yeah, the great Fred Biletnikoff over here over my my left shoulder on our show when we interviewed him last year, and we're looking forward to seeing Fred coming up this weekend. He said such an amazing line. He said, whenever we have an opportunity to talk to the team, I tell them that, we painted some lines on the road a long time ago, and now it's time for you guys to paint your own lines. And I would ask you, Raider Nation, how many players on this Raiders team are painting their own lines? Max Crosby, Devontae Adams, obviously, maybe Josh Jacobs, Colton Miller is in there, maybe Trayvon Merrick. Like, it's a very short list for guys that are painting their own lines. And the further that we get away from the mystique of the Raiders of the 70s and 80s, we now become synonymous with losing, where once upon a time we were synonymous with being one of the most winningest sports franchises in the history of all of sports, not just football, but we were more than the Montreal Canadiens or the New York Yankees or the Boston Celtics. Like, the Raiders were the winningest of franchises. And now we're a long ways away from that. And I'll say this real quick, that I sympathize with younger Raider fans. And I've had my challenges with some younger Raider fans because of the short-sightedness of things and whatnot. But I've gotten to a point where I feel for them, and I'm with you all that I have enough connectivity to although I was a young guy when the Raiders won that first Super Bowl and even the second, I remember vividly the third one, but I still have a connectivity to that. So no matter what happens when it comes to ineptitude on the field, I'll still have that connection. I'll still have those conversations around the house and my uncles and my dad and even my grandmother talking about how great the Raiders were and all these wonderful things. So I still have that, where younger Raider fans don't have, they barely have 2016. And then maybe if you're old enough, you can remember some of the Gruden years, but none of those equaled into championships. So I really do. I empathize with you all. And it's unfortunate because the Raiders and what they represented is just it's fading more and more and more. And, even for someone that has connectivity to it, I can only go back and watch John Facenda narrate Black Sunday so many times. I can only watch John Madden prowl the sidelines and Bill King talk about his grin looking like a slit watermelon, like all the amazing things that have happened in terms of the history of the Raiders and the imagery and the mystique. And it's, Al Davis pumping his fist on the sideline. Like, those things there's becoming a long, long time ago now at this point. So I think it's very important for the Raiders. Listen, if anybody's ever been through the Allegiant Stadium tour, it's a love letter. Allegiant Stadium itself is a love letter to the Raiders, love letter to the past of the Raiders. But that all ended in 1983.
Yeah. It's been a long time. I mean, you think about that. And I know some of the people who are watching or listening who are in the Bay Area. Look, the move to Vegas from a financial standpoint to get a stadium, all that stuff was the right move. I've always given Mark Davis credit for hiring the right people like Mark Bedane, had the help of Napoleon McCallum to get them what they needed to compete. So now they have everything they need. They have the financials. They have the stadium to get that done, and it's not getting done. So here we are 3 years into the Las Vegas Raiders, and things are going backward. We saw some improvement. It was incremental under John Gruden. The drafts not counted, obviously, because they were brutal, but they were doing more on the field. And so now you see this going absolutely backward. And I just think this is an inflection point, Murph. And again, I don't say go fire somebody, but I do look at it and say, look, it's not working. And if it's not working, why are you going to continue to do it? And so I think Mark Davis, as an owner, this is a seminal moment for him. He's got to do something.
Yes.
And not only that, he's got to make a decision. The next decision he makes, when he decides to make it, whenever that is, whether it's now in 2 weeks or at the end of the season, he's got to make a really good decision. And if I'm in his shoes, I'm going to get the best football people I know. I don't care who it is. And I'm going to say, hey, I need your help. I need the guys to come in and get this right. This may be my last opportunity to turn this thing around, to make my father's memory live longer, and to make him proud by doing the right thing. And I know people out there are going to say, well, he can't, he's an idiot, blah, blah. And you know what? That might be the case. Sometimes you have bad owners, and bad owners sometimes never improve. We saw it in Washington with Daniel Snyder, and we saw it with a lot of other people too. There's been a lot of owners like, hey, look, the Fords in Detroit have been awful. I mean, you look at what's happened with the Lions. Now they got things on the track now, but look how long it took them to get there. Okay, so that in itself is very important, and I think that whatever he does next, he can't rely on his own judgment of people to go hire the best people. He's got to find others who actually know what they're doing. And he's admitted he's not a football guy. So if you're not a football guy, you can't listen to people. And he's a great guy. And I don't know what happened, why he left, but you can't listen to people like Marcel Reese. He's not an NFL executive. He's not someone who's built a team. You have to listen to people who've done it multiple times and who are successful at it, and ask for their help. Got to pay them to do it? Great. Pay them to do it. But I want to see, from my perspective, I want to see them make moves that make the NFL say, whoa, okay, now they're serious about winning.
Yeah, I think it's time for a VP of football operations. I mean, and maybe that's even a Sandra Douglas Morgan. You've already got somebody with a brilliant business sense in the building. You know, maybe you turn over the responsibility of hiring, you know, not the coach, but a GM or that VP of football operations. Maybe you turn that over to her. I don't know what the case is, but I'm with you on that in terms of the overall, and regardless of what the titles are, you know, or whoever comes out of retirement, Scott Pioli, or if that's Tom Brady or whatever the case may be, the idea that Mark is, and this is where I have respect for him, is that I think that he's made these front office decisions with the best intentions. The spirit behind handing the keys to the kingdom to John Gruden, or handing the keys to Reggie McKenzie, like, I think they were coming from the right place. So that's where, you know, unfortunately the results didn't pay out the way that we wanted them to, but I think that it was, so they came from the right spirit. So that's where I don't have as much criticism for Mark. That said, it's getting to the point now again where maybe he even takes a further step back by hiring a VP of football operations. I've said this numerous times now. Look at what the Bidwells did when they brought John Elway in. They handed everything over to John. He handled the front office. He handled the decision-making. And, of course, John has a unique attachment to the Broncos versus someone else that might come in and make these decisions for the Raiders. But point being, though, is that the Bidwells didn't have anything to do with any of it. They were so far out of it. Where right now Mark is responsible for firing, you know, Ziegler or even Josh McDaniels. Well, take him even out of that. Just go be an owner, Mark. Go, because as you mentioned, we have the utmost in facilities in terms of not only place to play, but places to train, which was an indictment. For those of you that are old enough to remember, there was a huge indictment of the Raiders and a failure on Al Davis's part for many, many years. They didn't have great training facilities. We didn't have a great place to play. Like, if there's one thing you can point at Al, other than maybe some personnel decisions at the latter part of his career, when you look at what his, and I hate to say it, but the failures in terms of facility went on for 40 freaking years. Like, so like when you look at what Mark has done, it's been highly successful. So let's applaud him for that and let him just go do that stuff.
So it's a good point, because here's a correlation I'll draw, Murph, which is when they were organizing and getting ready to make the push to go to Las Vegas, Mark got smart business people to work on that. He didn't interfere with it. He just said, hey, whatever you need to do, you do it. So he needs to do that on the football side. And to your point, Sandra Douglas Morgan, I don't know what she's done as the president of the Raiders. I can't comment on how successful she's been or not, because that side of it, I don't know. I'm assuming it's good because the business side of things is good for the Raiders. But when it comes to the football, you got to have football minds, right? And you have to have current football minds. Not, Ron Wolf has a Raider pedigree, but Ron Wolf's been out of the league for a long time. He's an older guy. I don't think that's the kind of guy you get. You need to get somebody who understands what's happening in the NFL now to be able to do that. And I'll make this comment because I often make fun of it because I'm not a fan of the WNBA. But Mark Davis went out, he bought this team, and everybody kind of chuckled at it and said, well, and sometimes I think he focuses more on it than the Raiders. But what he did there, for those of you who don't know, is he hired really good people, including the coach, to go build a women's basketball team in that environment, in that league, to win. And they've won 2 championships in a row. So clearly he had the right people to do that. He has to take that same approach. And I know it sounds crazy to say, well, take your approach for the WNBA because it's completely apples and oranges. But the spirit of that is, okay, I got to go get the best people to build this football team. I'm staying out of the coach thing. I'm staying out of the GM thing. Yes. What I'm going to do is, I get final say on it. And I want to meet these people and make sure I'm good with it, but I'm giving it to you and I'm not factoring in the decision. You are making the decision because I'm handing over the keys because you know how to drive the car. It's a stick shift and I only know how to drive automatic. So I'm letting you drive a manual transmission because I just don't know how to drive it, but that's okay. As long as you guys commit to me that this is what you're going to do and it delivers a winning football team to me, then we're good. That's what he has to do.
Totally agree. That's your VP of football operations. And that's where I think that and you could even distance it. When I brought up Sandra Douglas Morgan, maybe you hand that responsibility of hiring that VP of football operations to her, just to even give that extra, even layer depth, there in terms of the hiring and the focus. I think ultimately that's what's going to happen. And I don't know. And it's so, again, you go back to the idea that it's his football team. He can do whatever he wants to do with it. And we as fans and whatever, I understand that he's going to do what he feels is best for the football team. So I'm going to trust that he's going to continue to make those decisions. But is it always going to be the right one? I don't know. And I to go back to the idea that if I'm in that spot and I can only look, I'm a knucklehead in my bonus room with a freaking microphone and a mastiff running around here. I got to think that I'm willing to take my ego out of it and back up and just hand it over. I think that's a prudent move at this point, Scott.
Yeah, and you've got some people in the chat saying the Raiders were better in Oakland. I don't know how you say that because from 2002 until 2020 when they moved, they only made the playoffs once. So, I mean, maybe your memory of the Raiders in Oakland was they were better, but it's not. I think this is an issue, obviously, since, like you said, probably the last 5 or 6 years under Al Davis. Obviously they had success in 2002, but there were, as he got more frail, things kind of went off the track. And of course the league changed too, right? With the salary cap and things. And that was not, Al went out and got what Al wanted. So we don't live in that environment anymore, but there's no living in the past. You can celebrate your past and it can be part of who you are, but it certainly is not something that dictates your future. Your future is always dictated by what you do in the present and the decisions you make to set yourself up for success. So it's a tough one. I know we've gotten into some bigger, deeper issues here, and we'll talk about those as we move forward. But I'm real interested, Murph, to see what happens this week. What are the stories? What are the stuff we see out of the beat writers when it comes to the future of Jimmy Garoppolo as starting quarterback? If things are status quo this entire week leading up to the New York game this coming Sunday, and I'm a Raider fan, that would make me even more angry. You can get over the loss. It's over. Turn the page after a couple of days. If you start to hear some movement around, hey, we're going to do things differently. We're doing this. You hear Mark Davis say he's pissed off and this is not acceptable. Okay, fine. Then you start to say, all right, so there's recognition in the building that this isn't acceptable and it's not sustainable to do this. Then fine. If you don't hear that, then I'm telling all of you listening or watching that should make you even more angry because there's got to be change and change has got to come pretty soon in my book. By the way, so for all of you who've donated to the One Nation Foundation in the super chat, thank you so much for that. Murph, the One Nation Foundation, for those of you, we got a ton of people on watching us live And we always do this, and please don't tune out because I want you to hear this. Murf, Michelle, and Swag Jeff, and everybody involved with the One Nation Foundation. Tell everybody about it, what you guys do, and how it benefits Raider Nation charities inside the family.
Oh, thank you so much, Scott. So yeah, we figured out that we could make some money with Raiders Fan Radio a few years ago, back in 2019. And we decided we wanted to give all that money away. So we give it strictly to Raiders related charities. And the biggest benefactor that we have is the Bolitnikoff Foundation. And we're going to present a check for $15,000 on behalf of you, Raider Nation, upcoming at their annual crab feed, which happens this Friday. Coming up, we're going to be out there in Vegas to present that check, and we always let the Bolitnikoffs know that this comes from Raider Nation, comes from buying merchandise for Raiders Fan Radio, it comes from super chat donations, it comes from direct donations, it comes from advertising opportunities. All those things, anytime that we can generate money, we give it all away. And we can't thank you all enough because we have now entered into corporate sponsorship with folks like United Rentals and Bridgestone. We've also got the boy, Will Compton, on board, who gave us a very generous donation this year. And so we just can't thank you all enough because we can't get to those corporate sponsors and advertisers like Manscaped even is another one without you hitting a like, hit a subscribe, hit a thumbs up. Subscribe to the audio podcast, support here at Silver and Black today. We thank you guys so very, very much. And they're literally doing life-changing work in terms of the Bolitnikoff Foundation. I talked to Angela Fred's wife earlier this week, and they are they broke ground and are building a new facility that not only offers rehabilitative services and counseling services for young women at risk of domestic violence and substance abuse, but it gives them a safe place. They bring them in and they offer them up from the most simple things like, domestic skills and whatnot going forward as they reacclimate into life. And so it's incredible work that these Raiders related charities are doing. Also, we've partnered with Raider Dad this year, who are taking underprivileged kids to Raider games with their parental figures. Just these incredible organizations that are out there, and we can't do that without you guys. Thank you so very, very much. We love you so very, very much, and so thankful to represent your generosity. And again, we always make sure that we let them know that we're just the vessels. We're just the knuckleheads with a microphone and a reason to gather around and talk about our favorite football team and bitch about our head coach and whatnot. But it's you guys, Raider Nation. You're the ones that make this happen. And Scott, I can't thank you enough for your platform and also the contributions that you've made to the foundation this year. And I know where we're going with this thing in the future. And it just, our hearts are just so thankful for everything that you and Raider Nation have done to help us out and represent the One Nation Foundation.
Yeah, it's really remarkable work, what you guys do, and it's all out of a passion and a love for the Raiders. That's how it started, obviously, and it's amazing because I know how much Raider Nation is a family. I didn't grow up in that family, of course. As you know, my history of liking that other AFC West team since I grew up in San Diego, but it's been remarkable, and ever since I've covered the Raiders, getting to know even the super fans like Wayne Mabry, all those people. I mean, just amazing folks. And that's why, like last week when the Raiders lost, people were like, wow, you're so fired up. I thought you weren't a fan. It's like, it's not. It's because I care about the people. I care about our listeners and our viewers and all of you out there who care for the team and just want the best for them. And I'm seeing a lot of protest at Raiders headquarters stuff. And I think this idea that Raider fans aren't going to tell ownership what they're feeling about what's going on, I think it's only going to build more and more because people are united behind the fact that they just want their team to have a fair shake here. They want their team to have competent people coaching it, competent people running it so that they can enjoy their football on Sundays and not be in this repetitive nature of losing seasons and decisions that seem just out of the blue. So hopefully that changes over. But the good news is, like Murf talked about, good things going on with the One Nation Foundation, of course, the Bolitnikoff Foundation, and you're going out for Crab Fest, as you mentioned. I'm so bummed I can't go this year, but amazing work, and thank you for doing that. And, of course, thank you for coming on here, too. You thank me for coming on the platform, but I will tell you, I love doing this with you. It's always important. I always tell people, I don't do the show as a fan, but the fan's voice is important, and it needs to always be heard. And you, as an ambassador for fans, whether they've chosen you or not, are a great one. So thank you, my friend. I appreciate that as always. And I have fun doing these shows. I mean, I'd love to have Mo on as well. And he comes on occasionally when he's got the time, But always fun to do it with you. And we will do it again next week. And hopefully things will change and maybe they get a win.
Yeah, hopefully, man. And thank you again. I love jumping on this show and talking to Raider Nation. And it's so funny. It's hard for me to keep up with the chat. But I always go back and read the chat and read back through the YouTube comments. And it's so funny. Like most of the comments that we read are overwhelmingly positive, and Raider Nation is kind of vibing with what we're talking about. And even you, Scott, you didn't grow up a Raider fan, but we won't hold that against you, man. Yeah, I think you represent Raider Nation so incredibly well. But it's so funny. I just want to call out one spirit of some comments where they're like, does Murf ever have a forethought? Everything is an afterthought. It's an after show. We're here to talk about what we just saw. Everything is reactionary. You want forethoughts? Join us on Wednesday at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. I'll give you all the forethoughts you want.
Well, it's interesting, too, because in today's day and age, and you're a great example, I'm a great example. Remember, I had started off in the media and then went corporate route doing PR and stuff. So I was out of it for many, many years. And then when the Raiders moved to Vegas is when I started Silver and Black Today. It started as a website. I was doing a podcast that nobody listened to and built it up. And in today's world, you can be heard. You can create content. And so when people are critical, I don't mind if people are critical of me or if they have a disagreement with me. It's always good. That's always fine. But I love when people are critical of the content because it's very easy to do when you don't produce anything. Right. To sit in front of a camera or a microphone and do it, especially if you've never done it before. Now, like I said, I've done it before, but there's a lot of fans who have great shows, great platforms, and they do content and people criticize them for it. But it's like, okay, so then you know what? Do it yourself, and let's see how your stuff is. But it's always good, like you said. It's 99% positive always, and we certainly appreciate it. Even for those of you who are really negative, I understand why, and don't blame you on one side of it. But just remember, life is short. My good friend Brian Plumer, who I lost just a couple of years ago, who was just a rabid Raider fan. Was always that way. A lot of tough things in his life and unfortunately died at a young age, but he always looked positive. So I always remember him when I talk Raiders, because even when the Raiders stunk, he would vent for 5 minutes and then he'd stop and then he'd say, you know what, but I wouldn't give up the Raiders for anything. So just consider that as you sit there in the depths of tonight's loss and the lack of a quarterback and all that jazz. But anyway, all right. So Murf, thanks, man. I appreciate it. And we will see you next week. And we'll see you Wednesday over on Raiders Fan Radio.
Actually, we're off this week because we're traveling to Vegas.
That's right.
Valerie and I will be leaving at the crack of dawn on Thursday to head to Vegas. So no show for us this Wednesday, but I'll be back here with you on Silver and Black Today after we beat the Giants. Let's go. Darren Waller, revenge game my ass. Let's go, Raiders.
He hurt his hamstring again this week. Go figure.
Oh, shocker.
Yeah, that's a shocker. All right,
that's
my friend.
Predictable than a Scream movie.
Well, safe travels then, and we will see you next time.
All right. Thank you, Scott. Have a good night, Raider Nation. Love you guys.
All right, there you go. Always fun to mix it up with Murf. I can't wait to get down to his place in Nashville and do a show with them. I'm excited about that. So do it. But listen, I want to thank all of you for joining us here in the live post-game show here on Silver and Black Today. Mo and I will be back on Thursday with this weird schedule. We might drop a small show for Wednesday. We'll see if that holds up. But anyway, I want to thank you guys all for being here. Thank you for the great chat, your super chats, and your donations to the One Nation Foundation too. Much appreciated. Raider Nation always takes care of itself. Now let's hope the Raiders take care of all of you soon and get this team pointed in the right direction. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your audio. We appreciate that so much, Mo and I. Also, subscribe here on the YouTube channel. Hit the notifications bell so you know anytime we go live or have a new video up. Appreciate it. Also, follow us on TikTok now, Silver and Black Today. I've been doing some TikToks there and sharing some fun stuff with you, so we appreciate it.